Grace Ashford was 30 seconds away from losing her job when the stranger walked into the pharmaceutical research lab with eyes that seemed to hold entire kingdoms. She had been arguing with her supervisor about the ethical implications of rushing clinical trials, her voice rising despite knowing that Dr. Morrison held her career in his hands. The research facility where she worked as a senior biochemist had been under new ownership for 6 months, and the pressure to produce results had become suffocating. Grace believed in the work they were doing, developing treatments for rare genetic disorders, but not at the expense of patient safety. "If you cannot follow directives, Miss Ashford, perhaps you should reconsider your position here," Dr. Morrison said, his face red with anger. "And if following directives means compromising our standards, then maybe I should," Grace shot back, immediately regretting her words but refusing to back down. The door to the lab opened, and a man walked in with the kind of presence that made everyone stop what they were doing. He was tall, probably 6'3", with dark hair that looked professionally styled but slightly tousled, as if he had been running his hands through it. He wore an expensive suit that fit him perfectly, but there was something about the way he carried himself that suggested he would have commanded attention in anything he wore. Dr. Morrison's entire demeanor changed. "Mr. Quinn, we were not expecting you today." The stranger's eyes moved from Morrison to Grace, and she felt her breath catch. They were an unusual shade of blue-gray, intense and assessing. "Clearly," he said, his voice deep and controlled, "I wanted to see how the research was progressing. I hope I am not interrupting anything important." "Not at all," Morrison said quickly. "We were just discussing project timelines." Grace could not help herself. "We were discussing whether rushing those timelines might endanger trial participants." Morrison looked like he might have a stroke, but the stranger, this Mr. Quinn, turned his full attention to her. "Were you? That sounds like exactly the kind of discussion we should be having. And you are Grace Ashford, senior biochemist," she said, lifting her chin slightly. She had already burned this bridge with Morrison. She might as well go down fighting for what she believed in. "Miss Ashford has very passionate opinions," Morrison said tightly. "Passion for patient safety should be encouraged, not discouraged," Mr. Quinn said, his eyes never leaving Grace's face. "I would like to hear more about your concerns, Miss Ashford. Perhaps you could walk me through the current trial protocols." For the next hour, Grace found herself giving an impromptu presentation to someone she assumed was some kind of consultant or investor. Quinn Quartermaine, as she learned his name was, asked intelligent questions that demonstrated a surprising depth of knowledge about pharmaceutical research. He listened carefully when she explained her concerns about compressed trial phases, and nodded when she showed him the data that suggested they needed more time for proper safety assessments. Morrison hovered anxiously throughout the entire conversation, clearly torn between wanting to silence Grace and not wanting to contradict whatever Quinn was thinking. "Thank you, Miss Ashford," Quinn said finally. "This has been remarkably illuminating." He turned to Morrison. "I think we need to reconsider the current timeline. Patient safety must be our primary concern." Morrison's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Of course, Mr. Quartermaine." After Quinn left, Morrison turned to Grace with barely contained fury. "You are incredibly lucky that Mr. Quartermaine agreed with you. Do you have any idea who he is?" Grace shook her head. "He is the CEO of Quartermaine Industries, which owns this facility and about 24 others. He could have shut down this entire project with a word. He could have fired us all." Grace felt her stomach drop. She had just lectured the CEO about his own company's practices. "I did not realize, obviously." Morrison stalked away, leaving Grace standing in the lab, wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her career, or somehow managed to save it. She did not expect to see Quinn Quartermaine again. CEOs of major pharmaceutical conglomerates did not typically spend time with mid-level researchers. But 3 days later, he appeared at the lab again, this time asking specifically for her. "I have been reviewing the trial data you mentioned," he said, falling into step beside her as she walked to the equipment storage area. "You were right about the safety concerns. I have authorized an extension of the trial phases and additional oversight." Grace stopped walking and turned to face him. "Thank you. That means a lot. Those patients deserve our best work, not our fastest work." "Agreed." He studied her with those intense eyes. "Have you always been this willing to risk your job for your principles?" "Only when it matters," she said honestly. "And this matters." A slight smile touched his lips, transforming his serious face into something warmer. "How long have you been in pharmaceutical research?" 8 years. I did my doctorate in biochemistry with a focus on genetic therapies. This field, working on treatments for rare diseases, it is why I became a scientist. They talked for another 20 minutes, and Grace found herself relaxing despite Quinn's intimidating position. He was easy to talk to when he was not being the powerful CEO, asking genuine questions about her work and her research philosophy. There was something almost lonely about him, she thought, as if he was starved for authentic conversation. When he finally left, her colleague Sarah hurried over. "Grace, do you know he has been here 3 times in the past week? He usually visits maybe once a quarter. Everyone is talking about it." "He is probably just concerned about the trial protocols," Grace said, but she felt a flutter of something in her chest that she tried to ignore. The following week, Quinn appeared again, and this time he asked if she would join him for lunch to discuss the research program. Grace agreed, telling herself it was purely professional, even as she changed her blouse and touched up her makeup before meeting him. They went to a quiet restaurant near the research facility, and Grace was surprised by how normal it felt. Quinn asked about her background, and she told him about growing up in Seattle, the daughter of 2 teachers, and how she had always been fascinated by the puzzle-like nature of biochemistry. "What made you focus on rare diseases?" he asked, his attention completely focused on her in a way that made her feel like she was the only person in the room. "My younger brother," she said quietly. "He had a rare metabolic disorder. There was no treatment, no research, nothing. He died when he was 12 and I was 15. I decided then that I wanted to spend my life making sure other families did not have to go through what we did." Quinn's expression softened. "I am sorry about your brother. Thank you. It was a long time ago, but it still drives everything I do." She took a sip of water. "What about you? What made you go into pharmaceuticals? You clearly know the science, so you are not just a business person." "I have a doctorate in molecular biology," he said. "I started in research myself, actually. But I realized I could potentially help more people by running companies that develop treatments rather than working on a single project, so I transitioned to the business side. That must have been difficult, giving up hands-on research." "It was. Still is, sometimes. That is why I like visiting the labs, talking to researchers who are still in the trenches." His eyes met hers. "Talking to you." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. There was something in the way he said it, something that suggested this was not just about professional interest. Over the next month, Quinn found reasons to visit the facility regularly. Sometimes he asked about research protocols. Sometimes he wanted Grace's opinion on other projects the company was developing. And sometimes he just appeared at her lab and asked if she wanted to grab coffee. Grace found herself looking forward to his visits, found herself thinking about him at odd moments during the day. Sarah noticed, of course. "He likes you," she said one afternoon after Quinn had spent 2 hours reviewing data with Grace. "He is just interested in the research," Grace protested weakly. "Grace, billionaire CEOs do not spend hours at random research facilities because they are interested in data. They have people for that. He is interested in you." "He is not a billionaire," Grace said. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Grace a Forbes article. Quinn Quartermaine, CEO of Quartermaine Industries, estimated net worth $3.7 billion. He is definitely a billionaire, and he is definitely interested in you. Grace stared at the article, feeling suddenly out of her depth. She had known Quinn was wealthy and powerful, but seeing it in black and white like this made it real in a way it had not been before. She was a research scientist who lived in a one-bedroom apartment and drove a 10-year-old sedan. What could someone like Quinn Quartermaine possibly want with her beyond professional consultation? But the next time Quinn visited, he did not ask about research. Instead, he asked if she would have dinner with him that weekend. Not a business lunch, but dinner. A date. Grace knew she should probably say no. This was her boss, technically, even if he was several levels removed from her day-to-day work. It was complicated and potentially problematic, and if it went badly, it could affect her career. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I would like that." Quinn's smile was worth every potential complication. He picked her up on Saturday evening in a car that probably cost more than she made in a year, but he opened the door for her himself. No driver, no entourage. He had made reservations at an elegant restaurant with a view of the city, and Grace was glad she had splurged on a new dress for the occasion. Over dinner, they talked about everything except work. Quinn told her about growing up in England, about boarding schools and university, about the pressure of family expectations. Grace talked about her close-knit family, her parents who still taught at the same schools they had worked at for 30 years, her relationship with her older sister. "Do you see them often?" Quinn asked. "Every few weeks. Sunday dinners are sacred in my family. My mom cooks and we all sit around and talk for hours." She paused. "What about you? Are you close with your family?" Something flickered across Quinn's face, something complicated. "It is difficult. There are a lot of expectations, a lot of obligations. Sometimes I feel like I am living two different lives." "That sounds lonely," Grace said softly. "It can be." He reached across the table and took her hand, and Grace felt electricity shoot through her at the contact, but less so lately. They stayed at the restaurant until closing, talking and laughing, and when Quinn drove her home, he walked her to her door like a gentleman. He did not try to kiss her, just held her hand and said, "I would very much like to see you again, Grace." "I would like that too," she said, and meant it completely. Over the next 3 months, they fell into a pattern. Quinn would visit the lab during the week, sometimes for business, sometimes just to see her. On weekends, they went out, exploring the city together, finding quiet restaurants and art galleries and parks where they could talk for hours. Grace learned that Quinn had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, that he was surprisingly romantic, bringing her flowers and remembering small details she mentioned. He learned that she loved old movies and terrible puns, that she was fiercely loyal to the people she cared about, and that she had a stubborn streak a mile wide when she believed she was right. They had not slept together yet, although the tension between them grew with every touch, every lingering look. Quinn seemed to be holding back, as if there was something he needed to resolve first, and Grace did not push. She was falling in love with him. She knew that, even though it terrified her. He was so far outside her world, so powerful and wealthy and important. And yet when they were together, he was just Quinn, the man who made her laugh and listened when she talked about her work and looked at her like she was the most important person in the world. It was 3.5 months into their relationship when everything changed. Grace was at her apartment on a Sunday afternoon, doing laundry and catching up on reading when her phone rang. It was Sarah, and she sounded frantic. "Grace, turn on the news, any channel." "What? Why?" "Just do it. Now." Grace turned on her television and flipped to a news channel. The breaking news banner at the bottom of the screen made her freeze. Prince Quentin of Valoria, the crown prince who abdicated his position 12 years ago, has been living in the United States under the name Quinn Quartermaine. The revelation comes as the king of Valoria's health declines, raising questions about succession. The screen showed a photo of Quinn, or Quentin, wearing formal military dress covered in medals and insignia. Another photo showed him at some kind of state function, standing next to an older couple wearing crowns. Grace sat down heavily on her couch, her mind reeling. Quinn was royalty. Not just wealthy, not just powerful, but actual royalty. A prince. And he had never told her. Her phone rang again. This time it was Quinn. "Grace, please let me explain," he said as soon as she answered. "You are a prince." Her voice sounded hollow to her own ears. I abdicated. I walked away from all of it 12 years ago because I wanted a different life. And you did not think to mention this. We have been together for months, Quinn, or should I call you Quentin? Your Highness, please do not. His voice was strained. I am not that person anymore. I left that life behind. I am just Quinn. You are not just anything, Grace said, anger cutting through the shock. You are a billionaire CEO who is apparently also royalty, and I am a research scientist from Seattle who does not even have a passport. How could this possibly work? Because I love you. The words hung in the air between them. He had never said it before, and Grace had been waiting, hoping, but not like this, not in the middle of this chaos. You should have told me, she said, her voice breaking. I deserve to know. I know, you are right, I was afraid. Afraid of what? That I would care, that I would treat you differently. Yes. Grace, everyone in my life wants something from me. They want access to power or money or royal connections. But you, from the very first day when you had no idea who I was, you just saw me. You argued with me about trial protocols like I was just another person with an opinion. Do you have any idea how rare that is, how precious? Grace closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. I need time to think about this. I need space to process. Of course, I understand. He paused. But Grace, please know that everything between us has been real. My feelings for you are the most real thing in my life. After they hung up, Grace sat on her couch for a long time, trying to make sense of everything. She pulled out her laptop and started searching for information about Prince Quentin of Valoria. Valoria, she learned, was a small but wealthy European nation, known for its banking sector and scenic mountain landscapes. Prince Quentin had been second in line to the throne, behind his older brother Prince Sebastian. But 12 years ago, shortly after completing his doctorate, Quentin had shocked the nation by abdicating his royal position and moving to the United States. He had legally changed his name to Quinn Quartermaine, using his mother's maiden name, and built a business empire in pharmaceuticals. The articles called it a scandal. Some suggested he had been forced out due to a disagreement with the royal family. Others speculated about a romantic relationship that the family disapproved of, but the truth seemed to be simpler. Quentin had wanted a life of his own, outside the confines of royal duty, and he had been willing to give up everything to have it. Now, with King Frederick's health failing and Prince Sebastian having no children, there was speculation that Quentin might be called back to Valoria to take his place in the line of succession. Grace spent the next week throwing herself into her work, trying not to think about Quinn, about princes, about the fact that her heart was breaking. Quinn called and texted, but she could not bring herself to respond. She needed to figure out what she wanted, what she could handle. Her mother called on Thursday evening. "Grace, honey, I saw the news about your friend. Are you okay?" "How did you know he was my friend?" A mother knows. "And also, you mentioned a Quinn you were seeing a few months ago, and I am not so old that I cannot connect dots." Her mother's voice was gentle. "Do you want to talk about it?" Grace found herself pouring out the whole story, meeting Quinn, falling for him, learning the truth. "I do not know what to do, Mom. How can I possibly fit into his life? He is royalty." "He was royalty," her mother corrected. "He walked away from it. That says something about what he values. The question is, do you love him?" "Yes," Grace whispered. "I love him so much, and that is what makes this so scary." "Love is always scary, sweetheart. It means giving someone the power to hurt you. But it also means the possibility of real happiness. You have to decide if he is worth the risk." After talking to her mother, Grace felt marginally better, but still confused. She decided to go to the lab on Friday evening to work on some data analysis, hoping the familiar routine would help clear her mind. She was surprised to find the lab dark, except for a single light in the corner. And sitting at her workstation, looking at the photos she kept pinned to her bulletin board, was Quinn. "How did you get in here?" she asked. "I own the building," he said quietly. "I am sorry. I should not have used that to intrude on your space. I just needed to see you and you were not answering my calls." He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his eyes had dark circles under them, and his expensive suit was rumpled. Grace felt her heart clench. "Why are you here, Quinn?" "To tell you the truth. All of it." He stood up, keeping distance between them as if he knew she needed space. "My full name is Quentin Alexander Frederick Valmont. I was born into the royal family of Valoria, second in line to the throne. I had everything I was supposed to want: wealth, power, position. But I was suffocating. Every moment of my life was planned, every relationship scrutinized, every decision made with consideration for how it would affect the monarchy. I loved science, I loved research, but I was told that princes do not work in laboratories. They serve their country through diplomacy and public service." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Grace had come to recognize as a sign of his distress. "When I finished my doctorate, I made a decision. I could spend the rest of my life being what everyone expected me to be, or I could choose my own path. So I abdicated. I gave up my title, my position, everything. I moved to the United States and started over as Quinn Quartermaine. I built my company because I wanted to make a difference in the world on my own terms, not because of the family I was born into." "Why did you not tell me?" Grace asked, the hurt evident in her voice. "Because for the first time in my life someone saw me as just me, not Prince Quentin, not a Valmont, just Quinn. Do you know what that felt like? It was like I could finally breathe." He took a step closer. "When I walked into that lab and saw you fighting for what you believed in, not caring about Morrison's authority, not caring about consequences, I was captivated. And then I got to know you, and you were brilliant and passionate and kind, and you made me laugh. You made me feel normal. But you are not normal, Quinn. You are a billionaire and a prince. I am a man who loves you," he said it fiercely. "I am a man who wakes up thinking about you and falls asleep thinking about you. I am a man who wants to spend the rest of his life making you happy. The rest of it, the money, the title I gave up, none of it matters compared to you." Grace felt tears streaming down her face. "They are saying you might have to go back, that your father is sick and your brother has no heirs, and that they might need you to return to the line of succession." "I know. The palace has been in contact. My father wants to see me, wants me to come home." Quinn closed the distance between them, cupping her face in his hands. "But I am not going unless you come with me. I am not going anywhere without you. Quinn, I cannot just go to Valoria. I have a job, a life here. I know. And I am not asking you to give that up. I am asking you to let me be part of your life, wherever that takes us. If you want to stay here and keep working, I will stay too. If you want to come with me to visit my family, I want you by my side. I just want you, Grace. Everything else we can figure out together. Grace looked up at him, at this complicated, powerful, wonderful man who somehow loved her. I was so hurt that you did not tell me. I know. I am so sorry. I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning. I was a coward. You abdicated the throne of a country. You are not a coward. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the stubble on his jaw. I love you too. I have for a while now, and it terrifies me because our worlds are so different. Our worlds are exactly as different as we let them be, Quinn said. I am not asking you to be a princess or to fit into royal protocols. I am asking you to be with me as you are, because you are perfect exactly as you are. He kissed her then, and Grace felt everything else fall away. The fear, the uncertainty, the complications. All that mattered was this moment, this man, this feeling of being completely and utterly loved. They stayed at the lab for hours, talking about everything. Quinn told her about growing up in the palace, about the pressures and expectations, about the brother he loved but could never quite measure up to in the eyes of the court. He told her about the relief he felt when he abdicated, and the guilt that came with it, wondering if he was being selfish. Grace told him about her fears, about feeling inadequate compared to the life he came from, about worrying that she would not be enough for him. You are more than enough, Quinn insisted. You are everything. Eventually, they left the lab and went to Grace's apartment. They made love for the first time that night, and it was tender and passionate and perfect. Afterwards, lying in Grace's small bed with Quinn's arms around her, she felt a peace she had not felt since the news broke. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now I go to Valoria to see my father. And I would very much like you to come with me if you are willing. Grace thought about it. It was terrifying, the idea of going to a European country to meet a king and queen, to step into Quinn's old world. But she loved him, and that meant being brave. Okay, she said. I will come with you. They flew to Valoria 2 weeks later, first class on a private plane that made Grace's head spin. Quinn held her hand during the entire flight, pointing out landmarks as they approached the small nation nestled in the mountains between Switzerland and Austria. The palace was like something out of a fairy tale, all turrets and stone walls and manicured gardens. A fleet of cars met them at the airport, along with security personnel who treated Quinn with a deference that was strange to see. He was Mr. Quartermaine, the CEO at home, casual and approachable. Here, he transformed into something else, his posture more formal, his voice taking on a clipped precision that suggested years of training. "Are you okay?" he asked Grace as they drove through the palace gates. "Ask me after I have met your parents," she said, only half joking. King Frederick was in a wheelchair, his health clearly failing as the news reports had suggested, but his eyes were sharp and assessing when Quinn brought Grace to meet him. Queen Marguerite sat beside him, elegant in a way that made Grace feel hopelessly underdressed, despite the expensive outfit Quinn had insisted on buying her for the occasion. "Father, Mother, this is Grace Ashford," Quinn said, his hand at the small of Grace's back. "She is very important to me." "Your Majesties," Grace said, executing what she hoped was an acceptable curtsy based on the frantic internet research she had done on the plane. The king studied her for a long moment. "You are a scientist?" "Yes, Your Majesty. I am a biochemist. I work in pharmaceutical research." "That is how you met my son?" "Yes, sir. He came to the research facility to review our trial protocols. I argued with him about rushing safety standards." Grace felt Quinn tense beside her, but she continued. I did not know who he was at the time, but I would have argued with him anyway. Patient safety is more important than timelines. To her surprise, the king's lips quirked into something that might have been a smile. You argued with Quentin about safety protocols and he did not fire you. He agreed with me, actually. The queen leaned forward. You do realize that by being here, by being involved with our son, you will be subject to intense scrutiny. The media will investigate every aspect of your life. If Quentin returns to the line of succession, you will face even more pressure. Grace felt Quinn's hand tighten on her back, but she answered for herself. I do realize that, Your Majesty. It is not something I ever imagined for myself. But I love your son, and he is worth navigating whatever comes with that. The king and queen exchanged a look, some kind of silent communication that came from decades of marriage. Then the king turned to Quinn. You have chosen well, my son. She has courage. Over the next few days, Grace was introduced to the complexities of royal life. There were formal dinners where she had to remember which fork to use and how to address various nobility. There were meetings with advisors who assessed her with calculating eyes, clearly wondering if she was suitable for a prince. There were photographers who tried to sneak photos through the palace windows, hungry for images of Quinn's mysterious American girlfriend. Through it all, Quinn stayed by her side, his presence a steady anchor. He showed her the parts of the palace he had loved as a child, the library with its ancient books, the gardens where he used to hide from his tutors, the laboratory his mother had insisted on installing so he could pursue his passion for science. This is where I fell in love with research, he told her, showing her the still-equipped lab. My mother understood that I needed something that was mine, not just the role I was born into. Grace met Quinn's brother Sebastian, the crown prince who would become king when their father died. Sebastian was formal and serious, but kind, and he pulled Grace aside one evening. My brother has been happier in the past few months than I have seen him in years, Sebastian said. I know this world is overwhelming. It was overwhelming for me, and I was born into it. But if you love Quentin, if you are willing to fight through the complications, you should know that you have my support. Thank you, Your Highness. That means a lot. Sebastian, please. We are going to be family after all. On their last evening in Valoria, Quinn took Grace to a private overlook on the palace grounds. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. This is beautiful, Grace said, leaning into Quinn's embrace. I used to come here when I needed to think, Quinn said. When I was trying to decide whether to leave or stay, I spent hours up here, trying to imagine what my life would be like either way. Do you regret leaving? Not for a moment. Leaving gave me the freedom to become who I was meant to be. It gave me the opportunity to meet you. He turned her to face him. Grace, these past few days, watching you navigate this world with such grace and courage, I have fallen even more deeply in love with you. You handle my family with respect, but you never lose yourself. You are kind to everyone, from my parents to the palace staff. You are exactly who I thought you were, exactly who I love. Quinn, I know this is fast. I know we have only been together for a few months. But I have waited my whole life to find someone who sees me, really sees me, and loves me anyway. I do not want to wait any longer. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a stunning ring with a deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds. This was my grandmother's ring. She told me once to give it to someone who loved me for myself, not for my title or position. Grace Ashford, will you marry me? Grace felt tears streaming down her face. Yes. Yes, of course, yes. He slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her, and Grace felt like she was flying. This complicated, impossible, wonderful man loved her, wanted to build a life with her. It was terrifying and exhilarating and perfect. The news of their engagement made international headlines. Grace found herself thrust into a media spotlight she had never imagined, with reporters digging into her background, her family, her work. Her parents flew to Valoria to meet Quinn and his family, and watching her dad shake hands with a king while trying to maintain his usual friendly teacher demeanor was both hilarious and touching. "He is a good man," her father told her later. "He loves you. I can see it in how he looks at you. The rest of it, the titles and the wealth, that is just decoration. What matters is that he is a good man who will treat my daughter well." Planning a wedding when one party was former royalty and a billionaire CEO turned out to be a logistical nightmare. Quinn wanted something simple, just family and close friends. His parents wanted a formal royal ceremony that would satisfy the public interest. Grace just wanted to be married to Quinn and would have been happy with a courthouse ceremony. They compromised. The official ceremony would be held at the palace in Valoria, with all the appropriate pomp and circumstance. But before that, they would have a private ceremony with just their immediate families at a small chapel in Seattle, near where Grace grew up. The private ceremony was everything Grace had dreamed of. She wore a simple white dress that her mother cried over. Her sister was her maid of honor, and Quinn's brother Sebastian flew in to serve as best man. Her father walked her down the aisle while her mother played the piano, and when Quinn saw her, the love in his eyes made her forget to breathe. They exchanged vows they had written themselves. Quinn promised to always value her opinions, even when they disagreed about trial protocols. To support her work and her passions. To build a life with her where they were partners in everything. Grace promised to be brave, to face the complications of his world with courage, to remind him of who he was when the pressures of his various roles became too much. To love him not despite his past, but with full knowledge of everything he had been and everything he was becoming. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and Quinn kissed her, Grace felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The public ceremony in Valoria a month later was magnificent and overwhelming in equal measure. Grace wore a formal gown designed by a famous European fashion house, with a tiara on loan from the royal collection. The cathedral was filled with dignitaries and nobility from across Europe. The ceremony was broadcast on television, watched by millions. But what Grace remembered most was how Quinn held her hand through the entire ceremony, grounding her. How he whispered to her during the formal photographs, making her laugh when she felt overwhelmed by the formality of it all. How he danced with her at the reception, holding her close and ignoring everyone else, as if they were the only two people in the room. King Frederick's health continued to decline over the next year. Sebastian formally asked Quinn if he would consider returning to the line of succession, to serve as heir apparent until Sebastian's wife, who was pregnant with their first child, gave birth. Quinn discussed it with Grace. It would mean spending more time in Valoria, taking on some official duties. But I would not fully return to royal life. I still have the company, still have my work. It would just be a backup plan in case something happens to Sebastian before his child is born. "What do you want to do?" Grace asked. "I want to support my family. My brother has been dealing with all of this alone, and it is not fair. But I also do not want it to affect your life, your career." Grace had been thinking about this. "What if we split our time, spend half the year here, half in the States? I could consult on research projects remotely, travel for site visits when needed. We could make it work if we are both willing to compromise." They worked out an arrangement that satisfied everyone. Quinn returned to the line of succession temporarily, taking on some ceremonial duties in Valoria while continuing to run his company remotely. Grace set up a consulting practice, advising pharmaceutical companies on trial safety and ethics, work she could do from anywhere. They bought a home in Valoria, not in the palace, but close enough that Quinn could attend to his duties, and kept Quinn's penthouse in the city where Grace's lab was located. It was not always easy. There were days when Grace felt overwhelmed by the expectations of being married to royalty, even former royalty. Days when the press was intrusive and cruel, speculating about when she would have children or criticizing her clothes or her work schedule. Days when she missed the simplicity of her old life, when she was just a biochemist doing work she loved without any complications. But there were far more good days. Days when Quinn surprised her with breakfast in bed and they spent the morning just talking. Days when they worked together in his home lab, both of them absorbed in research. Days when Quinn's family treated her like she had always been part of them, when Queen Marguerite asked her advice or Sebastian's wife invited her shopping. Sebastian's wife gave birth to a healthy son, securing the succession and allowing Quinn to step back from official duties. King Frederick passed away peacefully 6 months later, and Sebastian became King Sebastian I. At the coronation, Grace stood beside Quinn, watching his brother take on the full weight of the crown, and she saw the relief in Quinn's eyes that it was not him. "Thank you," he whispered to her during the ceremony. "For what?" "For making it possible for me to be here for my family without giving up the life I built, for being willing to navigate all of this with me, for loving me." "Always," she whispered back. 2 years into their marriage, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She told Quinn over dinner at their home in Valoria, simply sliding the positive pregnancy test across the table. He stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at her with wonder in his eyes. "We are going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you so much. You have given me everything I never knew I wanted." Their daughter was born on a crisp autumn morning, with dark hair and blue-gray eyes like her father. They named her Sophia Grace, and watching Quinn hold their daughter for the first time, tears streaming down his face, Grace felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. The media went crazy, of course. Former crown prince's daughter. Potential future princess, if something happened to Sebastian's line. But Grace and Quinn protected their daughter's privacy fiercely, releasing only a single official photograph and refusing to discuss their family life in public. Sophia grew up between 2 worlds, just like her father. She spent time in the palace with her royal cousins and time in Seattle with Grace's parents. She visited research labs and played in palace gardens. She learned about duty and responsibility, but also about following her passions and choosing her own path. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Grace back to the overlook at the palace where he had proposed. Sophia was with her grandparents for the evening, and it was just the 2 of them watching the sunset. "Do you remember when you told me you did not have a passport and could not imagine fitting into my world?" Quinn asked, his arm around her. "I remember. I was terrified. And now?" Grace thought about their life. The home they had built together, the family they had created, the work they both still did that mattered to them, the compromise and communication that made it all possible. "Now, I know that I did not fit into your world. We built a new world together, one that works for both of us. That is better than fitting." "Much better," Quinn agreed. He kissed her temple. "I never thanked you properly for taking that risk, for giving up your simple life for this complicated one." "I did not give anything up," Grace said firmly. "I gained everything. You, Sophia, this life we have built. Yes, it is complicated sometimes. Yes, there are challenges I never imagined I would face, but I love you and that makes all of it worthwhile." I love you too. More than I could ever adequately express. They stood there as the sun set, watching the sky change colors, comfortable in the silence that came from deep knowledge of each other. Grace thought about the day Quinn had walked into her lab, how she had argued with him about trial protocols with no idea that she was talking to a CEO and former prince. She thought about how she had fallen in love with just Quinn, the man who listened and cared and made her laugh. Learning the full truth about his background had been a shock, certainly. It had complicated their relationship and added challenges she never anticipated, but it had not changed how she felt about him. If anything, understanding the sacrifices he had made to build a life on his own terms, the courage it took to walk away from his royal position, the way he handled the pressures of his multiple roles, it made her love him more deeply. The title he had given up, the wealth he had built, none of it mattered as much as the man he was. Kind, intelligent, passionate about making a difference in the world, devoted to their family, committed to their partnership. Their life was not perfect. There were still challenges, still moments of stress and disagreement. Grace still sometimes felt overwhelmed by the public attention, still had to navigate the complicated politics of being connected to royalty. Quinn still struggled sometimes with balancing his responsibilities to his company, his family, and their marriage. But they faced it all together, with honesty and communication and a commitment to making their relationship work. They had learned to compromise, to support each other's dreams while building shared ones. 3 years later, they welcomed a son, Alexander Frederick, named for both his grandfathers. Watching Quinn with their 2 children, seeing how present and hands-on he was as a father despite his demanding schedule, Grace fell in love with him all over again. Sophia started showing an interest in science, asking endless questions about Grace's work, and spending hours in Quinn's home lab mixing harmless chemicals under his supervision. Alexander was still young, but already showing the same intense curiosity. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and it was just Grace and Quinn, they would talk about the future, about the lives their children would build, the choices they would make, about the research projects Grace was working on, the treatments Quinn's company was developing, about the simple pleasure of being together after a long day. "You ever miss it?" Grace asked him one evening. "The simplicity of the life you had before you told me the truth?" Quinn considered the question seriously, as he always did. "I miss the simplicity sometimes, yes. There was something appealing about keeping my past completely separate from my present. But what I have now is better. A relationship with no secrets, a partner who knows all of me and loves me anyway. That is worth any complication. Even when the tabloids publish unflattering photos of me with Sophia at the park, even then," he said, pulling her closer. "Although for the record I have never seen an unflattering photo of you, you are beautiful always, smooth talker, only with you." On their 10th wedding anniversary, they renewed their vows in the same small chapel in Seattle where they had held their private ceremony. Their children stood with them, Sophia as flower girl and Alexander as ring bearer. Grace's parents and sister were there, along with Quinn's mother and brother's family. It was intimate and perfect, a celebration of the decade they had spent building a life together. After the ceremony, at the reception, Sebastian raised a toast. "When my brother told me he was walking away from his royal position, I thought he was making a mistake. I thought he would regret giving up his birthright, his role in our family's legacy. But watching him over the past years, watching the life he has built with Grace, I realize he knew exactly what he was doing. He was not running away from responsibility. He was running toward the life he was meant to live. Grace, You have been the best thing to ever happen to my brother. You made it possible for him to be fully himself, and for that, our entire family is grateful." Grace felt tears in her eyes as she looked at Quinn, at this man who had chosen her over expectations and duty, who had built a life with her that honored both of their values and dreams. "Thank you for seeing me," Quinn said quietly, echoing the words he had said so long ago in the lab. "Thank you for loving me, all of me, even the complicated royal parts." "Thank you for trusting me with the truth," Grace replied. "Even though it took you a while to get there," he laughed. "Yes, I probably should have mentioned the prince thing a bit earlier. Maybe second date instead of fourth month, maybe," Grace agreed, smiling. "But we got here eventually, and that is what matters." As the evening wore on and they danced together, surrounded by everyone they loved, Grace reflected on how far they had come. She had started as a biochemist with a simple life, devoted to her work and her principles. He had been a CEO with a secret past, trying to build a life separate from the identity he was born into. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone, a partnership rooted in honesty and respect, a family they both cherished, a life that encompassed their shared values and individual passions. The revelation of Quinn's royal background could have torn them apart, could have been an insurmountable obstacle. Instead, it had become just one part of their story, a complication they navigated together. Grace had learned that love was not about fitting into someone else's world, but about building a new world together. Quinn had learned that he did not have to choose between his past and his present, that he could honor his family while still being true to himself. Their children grew up knowing they came from two very different backgrounds, but that both were equally important. Sophia showed all signs of following in her parents' footsteps into science, though she also had a natural grace and diplomatic skill that made her a natural in social situations. Alexander was still young, but already demonstrated the same stubborn determination that had brought his parents together. Years passed, and the story of the CEO who revealed he was secret royalty became part of family lore, told and retold at gatherings. The children loved hearing about how their mother had argued with their father without knowing who he was, how he had fallen for her fierce dedication to her principles. "Mom was braver than you, Dad," Sophia teased when she was a teenager. "She stood up to a CEO. You just fell in love." "Love takes a different kind of courage," Quinn replied, winking at Grace. "The kind that means being vulnerable and honest, even when it is terrifying." As they grew older together, Grace and Quinn settled into a comfortable rhythm. The challenges of blending their worlds became routine, the once complicated logistics of their split life between countries becoming second nature. Grace's consulting practice had grown into a major voice in pharmaceutical ethics, and she was frequently invited to speak at conferences and advise regulatory bodies. Quinn's company continued to develop groundbreaking treatments, fulfilling his dream of making a real difference in people's lives. But more than their individual accomplishments, they were proud of what they had built together. A marriage rooted in mutual respect and genuine partnership, children who were confident and kind, a life that honored both of their backgrounds while creating something entirely new. On their 20th anniversary, they returned to the overlook at the palace where Quinn had proposed. Their children were grown now, Sophia in graduate school studying molecular biology, Alexander starting university with interests that changed weekly. "You remember what you said to me here?" Quinn asked, holding Grace close. "I said yes. Before that, when I asked if you regretted the complications," Grace smiled. "I said we had built a new world together. I stand by that, though I might add that it has been even better than I imagined." Better than arguing about trial protocols with a stranger in a lab. Much better. Although I still enjoy arguing with you about trial protocols, some things never change. Thank God for that, Quinn said, kissing her. They stood there as the sun set, just as they had so many times before, and Grace felt profound gratitude for the life they had built. The truth about Quinn's royal background had not made her love deeper because she learned he was a prince. It had made her love deeper because she understood the sacrifices he had made, the courage it took to choose his own path, the man he had become through those choices. He was not just a CEO or a former prince. He was her partner, her best friend, the father of her children, the person who made her laugh and challenged her thinking and supported her dreams while pursuing his own. The title and the wealth were just details in a much larger, much more important story about two people who found each other and chose to build a life together despite all the complications. And that, Grace thought as she watched another spectacular sunset with the man she loved, was the truest kind of fairy tale. Not a simple happily ever after, but a complicated, messy, beautiful life built on honesty, respect, and enduring love. Their story continued, as all good love stories do, not with a dramatic ending but with the quiet promise of many more years together, many more sunsets, many more moments of connection and joy. They had started as a scientist and a CEO with a secret, but they had become something much more important, partners in every sense of the word, building a legacy of love that would extend far beyond their own lives. And if sometimes the press still referred to Quinn as the prince who gave up his crown for love, well, he had never thought of it that way. He had not given up anything. He had chosen everything that mattered, the freedom to be himself, the work he loved, and most importantly, the woman who had loved him not for his title or his wealth, but for the man he truly was. That choice, made so many years ago when he walked away from royal life, had led him to Grace. And Grace, who had taken the risk of loving someone with such a complicated past, had discovered that love was not about simple or easy. It was about finding someone worth navigating the complications for, someone who made every challenge worthwhile. Together, they had proven that truth and love could not only coexist, but could strengthen each other, that revealing secrets could deepen rather than destroy connection, and that the best kind of royalty was not found in titles or crowns, but in the way two people treated each other with respect, kindness, and unwavering devotion. Their happily ever after was not a fairy tale ending. It was a beginning that had led to 20 years of partnership, parenthood, challenges overcome, and joys shared. And as they stood together watching the sun set over the mountains of Valoria, they both knew that the best was yet to come.